Hello, you have found yourself on the
Dina Haynes channel.
I'm an author and I wrote a book called Neesa, a contemporary romance story that's in the first book in a series called the Original Reality Book Series. And what that means is I have taken volunteers from actual readers just like you who filled out a form describing themselves to me, and then I created a heroine based off of them. They also got to pick the hero of their dreams, and then I crafted a fictional romance story for them with what I call a little message inside, just for them, for that person. So you'll find a link in the video as well as down below in the description where you can go back and view all the previous chapters. Also, you can find a sign-up sheet where you can volunteer to have a book written about you, and maybe you'll be one of the lucky heroines in this series. If you are new to my channel, go back to the beginning because we are entering chapter 24 and there's a lot of spoilers coming up from the last chapter. So if you've watched chapter 23, you know Neesa thinks she's pregnant. And Neesa is in Claire's bathroom right now taking the pregnancy test. So I'm sure you don't want to waste any time to get to the next chapter. I'm sure you want to know what the verdict is. So let's do it. Chapter 24, Reuben's perspective. Guys didn't sit around bragging about how great life got after they settled down with a woman. If they did, Reuben might have stopped the womanizing a long time ago, but then he never would have met Denise. He studied her profile as she drove them home from Claire and Calvin's Thanksgiving dinner party. His head was still in their backyard where Denise had joined them and the light had penetrated her floor-length dress, casting her body in shadow, every naked curve of it. He had been hard ever since. She was so beautiful it pained him to look at her. He kept expecting her to snap out of it, realize she'd made a mistake going out with him, and show him the door. Even now he tried not to think too much about it, lest she read his mind. She had grown quiet compared to when they first arrived. He told himself she was ravenous for him after spending so much time in other people's company, where they were forced to keep their hands to themselves. They had grown close so quickly that he was surprised it didn't worry him more. But he was in love, and everything seemed right with the world. He didn't want to question it. He almost pinched himself. Lately, he'd had a sense of urgency to make their relationship more permanent, knowing she came into contact with a lot of eligible rich men while on the job. She wasn't superficial like that, but he still added his blue-collar lifestyle to the laundry list of reasons he wasn't good enough for her. The longer he stayed with her, the more he wanted to take the next step. This past week, he had considered putting aside some money he had made on the Schaefer case toward buying her a ring, which blew his mind. Baby steps, he reminded himself. He had just told her he loved her. Relationships built up in stages, which meant it would be months before he had to think about what size diamond she'd want. And before that, dinner with Carter and Alicia so they could meet her and celebrate with him the fact that he'd found the perfect woman. The car lurched to a stop in the driveway as Denise engaged the brake, then got out. Reuben followed suit with a shopping bag full of leftovers in his hand, tugging at the crotch of his jeans where they pinched. He caught up to her on the front step. She opened the massive door and reset the alarm behind it. She was so quiet that for a minute he assumed they were playing a game. Who could hold out the longest before one of them busted a move? He helped her out of her leather jacket and let her wander off to greet Enola. She didn't make eye contact once. The whole nonchalant act drove him crazy. Which one of them was going to crack first? He kind of liked this game. After he hung their jackets in the closet and put their leftovers in the fridge, he searched until he found her in the guest room she used as an office, standing behind her work desk. She was acting preoccupied, but he knew better. He stepped up behind her, nuzzling her neck, and growled, "You drive me crazy, you know that?" She said, "Ben." She sounded as if she was about to say more, but when he brushed his erection against her backside, she gasped. He pinned her hands down on the desk, rubbing the bulging fly of his jeans against the contours of her ass. He loved how in sync they were, that he knew just what to do to set her on fire. She turned her head to look behind at him, and he slid his hands up over her breasts. The peaks pebbled under his touch, and she arched her head back, air shuddering out of her, signaling her ecstasy. His hands got busy pulling the length of fabric up until he touched skin and then the soft, wet heat of her core. Her scent was imprinted on his brain, and he couldn't wait to immerse himself in it. In a quick succession of movements, he was pressing himself into her. She let out a moan and slipped a hand behind him, her nails digging into his backside. She was powerless to do anything except urge him further. He knew her body, knew the spots that sent her into a mindless state of abandon, and he wanted to take her there fast, before he lost his own grip on control. Her muscles grew rigid, her knuckles white as she clutched the desk to keep from sliding forward. Her grunts and moans were music to his ears. Lately, his main purpose had become focused on her, making sure he made her happy at the exclusion of all else. Enola stood in the doorway and barked, but he paid the dog no mind as he held on to Denise's shoulders. Now was not the time to let up, not when she was so close. Her body turned liquid as she whimpered her release, music to his ears. Soon she fell limp and he caught her, wrapping his arms around her chest and waist. Her walls grew so slick he slipped out. Had he already let go? His body jerked as he came, pressed against her back. They stood panting, slumped over the desk for a few minutes before he left to dispose of the condom and get a towel from the guest bathroom. When he came back into the room, she wasn't there. He buttoned up his jeans and wandered down the hall to her bedroom, where he tracked her coming out of her master bathroom. She was naked, carrying on with the distant act with her dress balled up in her hand. Reuben asked, "Everything okay, baby doll?" She said, "Yeah." He followed her into the closet where she tossed the dress in the hamper. An uneasy mood landed between them as she threw on a loose-fitting shirt and leggings, her movements tense, her posture closed off. A sinking feeling punched him in the gut when he had been on a high only moments ago. He said, "Whoa, what's going on here? Did I do something wrong?" She said, "No, babe." She rushed by him, planting a quick kiss on his mouth. He said, "Neesa, stop." She spun around, her arms unnaturally still at her sides. He said, "Tell me what's wrong." The way she ran her hands in circles over the sleek surface of her leggings, he knew it was bad. He pulled a hand through his hair and asked, "What, you don't love me? Is that it?" As his heart dropped, he slumped onto the edge of the bed. He knew it was too good to be true. She said, "No, Ben." She rushed over and sat next to him, grasping his face and forcing him to look at her. "I love you. I don't think I ever loved anyone until you came along." He tried using his investigative skills to smell the lie, but they failed him. She meant too much to him, and the conviction in her eyes only reinforced what he wanted to hear. He said, "If you won't tell me... Remember, we had a deal, no secrets between us." The words sounded hollow to his ears, given he had a doozy of a secret hiding inside him. But the more invested he became in their relationship, the harder it was to drop that bomb. He had talked himself into believing it was irrelevant at this point. She wrung her hands and her face slackened into a shocked expression. When she averted her eyes, he worried what was so bad she couldn't look him in the face to say it. Had she cheated on him? He would deserve it after all those years of breaking women's hearts before Denise came along. She said, "I'm pregnant." Talk about bombs. All he wanted to do now was avoid her gaze as she waited for his reaction. He didn't have one. Her news seemed to press an off button that powered down his brain functions. For a minute, like the whole 60 seconds, he was a complete blank. He said, "I thought you were on the pill." As soon as he heard himself say it, he realized he'd missed an important opportunity to not stick his foot in his mouth. He closed his eyes, wishing he could roll back time a few minutes. She stood up. The pill? He had thought in the beginning of their relationship, the old cat and mouse days, that she was hostile toward him, but the tone of her voice now was a new, scarier version of hostile. He said, "Wait, that didn't come out like I meant it." She said, "Really? By all means, explain yourself." He fluttered his eyes, treading carefully over which words to use and how to string them together. Truth be told, he wasn't sure he had the brain power to tackle this issue. He had assisted on decades-old, unsolved cases that were a walk in the park compared to this interaction. He put his palms out in a placating gesture and took his time on each word. "I assumed you were on the pill, which was my mistake." She took a half step back, and he watched as the first tear slid down her cheek. She asked, "Are you saying it's a mistake?" He said, "For fuck's sake, is that the only word you heard me say? No, baby." Her bottom lip trembled, and he rushed up to hug her. "Babe, I'm sorry. This has never happened to me before." She hiccuped on a sob. He said, "Come, sit down." He eased her beside him on the bed. "When did you find out?" She said, "Tonight." She continued to talk, but he didn't hear her. The world had gone all squirrely on him as he digested the news. Hadn't he already considered putting a ring on her finger? Seemed like another lifetime ago. She looked at him expectantly. He asked, "What was that last part?" "Wait, you found out tonight? You mean at the party?" She said, "I told you. Claire had a pregnancy test on hand, and I couldn't wait any longer. I was worried sick keeping it to myself, and she's my best friend." He said, "I thought I was your best friend." Of course, Claire was her best friend, and so was he. He knew the notion was silly, but his mind wasn't tracking well. He focused on the topics that weren't so pregnancy related. She said, "You are, but I didn't want to worry you over something that might not be true." And then when she whipped out the test, I was like, here goes. I mean, I should see my doctor and get the official workup, but this is happening. Her chest heaved as she inhaled deeply. She looked relieved. How could she look relieved? Irritation burned inside him at the fact that she could so easily accept the circumstances. Of course, she'd had longer to process it. All that time spent in the car on the way home. She was making decisions about the future of their relationship without consulting him first. She asked, "What does that look?" He said, "What look?" She scooted away from him, her expression taking on a dark emotion that reminded him of girlfriend's past, right when things took a turn for the worst. She said, "I knew it. You don't want the baby. I knew it." He said, "Whoa, where'd that come from?" She said, "Your face." She pushed his head back with her finger. He said, "Well, don't let my face do the talking for me. Get it from the horse's mouth." Seeing her confused expression, he added, "You know what I mean." She said, "Then say what you mean, damn it." He said, He started off hot and heavy, but the bitter truth took some of the steam out of his stance. "I don't know if I want kids." She shut down, her face unreadable. He said, "Babe." He extended a hand to caress her arm, and she brushed it away. She said, "It's okay. No, I get it. This came way too soon for us." She nodded. "It's a lot to take on you told me tonight for the first time that you loved me. Maybe not enough for something like this." Agony ripped at his chest as he listened to her. His heart broke because her heart was breaking. He could hear it in the strain, the thinness of her voice. The only way to turn things around was to lie to her, which he swore he'd never do, and he'd kept his word since making that promise. Regardless, this wasn't the time for lying. He said, "That's not true, Neesa. I do love you." His own voice sounded rough to his ears. "I never said that word to another living soul because it was never said to me as a child, ever. I don't take it lightly. I mean it." Damn, his face was hot. He was terrified of taking on this challenge, and yet he feared losing her more. A tear sneaked down his cheek, and he swatted at it. How could he tell her that any decision they made on this matter would end in disaster? She steadied her hands for several beats. He wanted to pull his hair out. Gah, what was she thinking? She asked, "What do you want to do?" Her voice small. He took her hands, delicate in the palms of his big mitts. He wanted to protect her, but from whom? Himself? For the first and perhaps last time in his life, his heart was all in. If he left her now, it would be like severing a limb, maybe all of them. He said, "I need time to think." He cursed himself for choosing the wrong words again. "To adjust to this. Does that sound fair?" She shrugged while he wiped her tear-stained face with his hand. They sat there for a moment, staring at each other, all weepy-eyed. Her pain was his, compounded with the emotions already roiling inside. Finally, a woman had brought him to his knees. He asked, "Can I hold you?" She scooted into his embrace, and he laid them down on the mattress, entwining their limbs until his chin rested on her head. He kissed her, then rubbed his lips over the soft stubble of her hair, racking his brain over what to do. He must have said something out loud because she lifted her head, questioning him with a gaze. He gave a nervous chuckle and said, I don't know what to do. She searched his eyes. What is it you're scared of? His jaw ached from the effort to keep hard emotions inside, when what she needed right now was his full disclosure, and more importantly, his support. He cleared his throat. Well, you know my background. What kind of father will I make to a kid? My only example is a couple of loveless fuck-ups. I can't separate myself from that, from them. She said, one of them you never even grew up with. You're an individual. The choices are yours alone to make. He rubbed his thumb in circles over her temples and scalp, more a nervous tick than a comforting gesture. He asked, how can you put your trust in me? Because I can't. He squeezed his eyes shut and trembled. The memory of his childhood rushed over him. Not specific incidents, just the emotional disappointment, the torture of wondering why he'd been born if no one cared. He had forgotten how lonely, how insignificant he'd felt, but it all came rushing back to him in that moment. It was no wonder he'd gone into law enforcement. His job then and now gave him a sense of purpose in society, validated his existence. Without it, he wasn't sure what was left, wasn't sure how he'd convinced Denise to give him a chance, and why she'd stuck with him up until now. She tightened her hold on his body, as if by force alone she could keep him together, get him through this, make him the man he hoped to be but couldn't yet see. He sobbed silently in his grief. He wished he could be strong for her, but he had no defense against his fucked up gene pool. He never could have imagined this depth of despair in his former life. Talk about revealing secrets. This was the daddy of them all. Okay, that is the end of chapter 24. Please hit the like button and be sure to subscribe. And yeah, that's right, hit the little bell icon so you'll be notified as soon as the next chapter goes up. And I will see you then for chapter 25.